I'm not paying attention. That's Jeremy or Sarah or something like that. Good evening. It is 6 o'clock, and I'd like to call to order the April 13th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. Let's see, Debbie has noted our attendance. Looks like we have one commissioner absent right now.
And Elizabeth is here.
And Elizabeth is here. Well, great. Elizabeth, welcome, and come on up. This is for... My mic wasn't on. This is for the Volunteer Appreciation Month.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm so sorry I'm late. I have a teething baby, and I lose track of time these days. But hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Heredia. I'm with the Volunteer Coordinating Committee. And this evening, I'm just here to say thank you so much for the work that you all do. It's a large task, so we appreciate that from the Volunteer Committee. And cheers to another great year.
And there's your cookies, and if you want to.
Yes,
start right
cheers
here,
with
you can
sweets.
pass them down.
Yeah, of course.
And then start with Francisco. Pass them down. Everybody has napkins, so you can get stuff.
Well, and I think it's important to say thank you to you as well, Elizabeth. I know you're on the Volunteer Coordinating Committee, and it's a volunteer position as well. But for the VCC, none of us would be here. So thank you for all that time.
Yeah, we got this.
All right, moving forward, as the cookies are coming down. Commissioner Grants took 3. Just kidding, he took mine, it's okay. We have the March 2022 minutes. Is there any amendments, or is there a motion to approve?
I move we approve the minutes as they are.
All right.
Second.
We've got a motion by Vice Chair Grants and a second by Commissioner Herb to approve the minutes as presented. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, so we're going to do appearance of interested citizens. This time is available for anybody to talk to the Planning Commission about anything that's not open for a public hearing this evening. And I've got 3 names on a general sign up. I got Carolyn, David, and Jeffrey. Did you want to just talk to the Planning Commission about? I'm sorry, no. No? Okay. Okay, well, we'll move right on. Agenda item number 5. Well, this one's a long time coming. This is going to be a long read, so I apologize. This is the public hearing on the Development Code sections 1.200, 2.102, 2.103, 2.104, 2.105, 2.107, 2.130, 2.301, 2.303, 2.314, 2.315, 2.403, 2.404, 2.432, 3.101, 3.115, 3.116, and comprehensive plan sections, residential development goals, objectives, and policies. I will open the public hearing at 6:04 and turn it over to Mr. Witham and City Attorney Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Lawyer. As you said, this is a long time coming. There's been a lot of work that you all have done over the last several months to get to this point, the public hearing on these proposed changes to implement House Bill 2001. The packet was extra large, so you're welcome for that. But no, in all seriousness, we put in the packet a little 1-page handout on kind of an overview, and then a more detailed code summary overview that our consultant prepared for us, and then along with all the redline versions of the text. Up at the dais, you also received a couple of other handouts that I wanted to kind of call your attention to. One has all of the different figures, diagrams, what do we call them? Yeah, I guess that's good enough. The illustrations that kind of are, most of those are put in code sections specifically, but the package of those illustrations were ones that we had worked back and forth with the consultant. And so there was a couple of little tweaks that they made. Primarily, the only thing that we're wanting to make you aware of is that in your packets, the figures are not grayscale. They have like some green on them and some colors. And when we go to adopt and recommend, what we're hoping is that the recommendation would reflect that those figures that are in the code would be updated to reflect what's in front of you. So there's really not substantive changes to the figures that are in the code right now, but there are some formatting things because for reproduction down the road and tracking it, we'd rather have them be grayscaled. So that's one thing I wanted to bring to your attention. The second, Debbie had already mentioned, we did receive one written comment that came in as public testimony. That's before you for your consideration. And then the third is there's section 3.115. And that's one of our new sections. We had two new sections, 3.115 for middle housing land divisions and 3.116 for the expedited land division. And actually Commissioner Grenz gave me a call and pointed out some formatting issues with 3.115. I apologize I did not catch that pre-packet. Substantively, there's really no changes. There was a couple of little typos that I fixed. But the big thing is in the application submittal section, there was some repetitiveness in the original one that's in your packet now. And that had to do with some back and forth that I had, and Dina, who's not here tonight because she's on a well-deserved vacation, but that she and I had with the consultant, and in the back and forth, I missed a couple things that I didn't remove. So we kind of had doubled up and basically said, hey, submit this information, and then no, submit this information. So Commissioner Grenz, I appreciated it. He called me and said, Shane, this is a little confusing in what people are supposed to be submitting. And sure enough, I was like, oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. So the other element here is with the recommendation that we're asking for tonight, assuming we get to that point, is that we want to take that version of 3.115 that's in front of you to move forward, not the one that was originally in the packet. So I hope that makes sense.
Commissioner Grenz.
Shane, will you confirm that the changes to what's in front of us tonight for this section are limited to 3.11504?
Yes, with the exception that I changed an N to a T in where it talks about the final the final plat. It said final plan, and so I wanted it to say plat because that's what it's supposed to say. Which is, what is that? That would be 3.11507. Yes, 07. So that second word had said plan, it says final plat now. But yes, the 3.1104 was the only changes that were made there for you to look at and consider. So I kind of wanted to start off by pointing out those things so you have that. We have our consultant team with us here tonight. They're going to be giving a presentation, kind of walking through these changes to kind of land us, hopefully, home through this process. The other thing I did pull out in the staff report that I wanted to make a special note of is primarily all these changes that are before you, you've seen them before. There's not been, we didn't come to other meetings that we had and then just go crazy and change everything. We tried to make the changes according to input we've received throughout the process. And the one thing I wanted to highlight is while the vast majority of these changes are directly related to House Bill 2001, there are changes that were brought up at a previous planning commission meeting regarding heights for multifamily housing development. And then as well, a setback provision that we are recommending that we change since we have the code open. And that's really specific to the medium density zone. But essentially, I'll just kind of explain it at a high level. The height increases from 35 feet to 45 feet. The setback change is historically we've regulated setbacks for multifamily development specifically based on architectural building orientation. Well, it's not necessarily historically. We started doing that about 10 years ago. But what we've seen is as Keizer is compressed and we've seen more infill development, it gives less flexibility for developers to actually site buildings on sites. So we are proposing that we would go back to kind of the standard way of regulating setbacks, which is kind of how it's defined in our code, other than we used to have this little footnote that said for multifamily, you regulate based on architectural orientation. We're proposing to strike that out so it would fall back. What that means from a practical sense is that when you have a property and you're going to mass 3 or 4 apartment buildings on it, you essentially have, there's a front lot line, there's a rear lot line, and everything else would be a side lot line, regardless of if the building is sideways or front and back, or sometimes developers, in order to meet setbacks, they've got creative with their architecture of their building. And it doesn't really change the massing or the proximity, it just changes the way they look, which we've found is not always for the good. So we feel it's appropriate to change that provision, allow a little bit more flexibility on site design itself. So I wanted to bring that up and highlight that. It was, like I said, I think we talked about it 2 meetings ago, or maybe 3 meetings ago briefly. It came up in the conversations. So other than that, everything before you should be fairly familiar. Hopefully you had a chance to get through it all. We're definitely looking and asking for Planning Commission to make a recommendation tonight as our time frame is coming to an end. So if there are items that you've gone through and identified that you need to make changes on, be prepared to give those to us so that we can get that down for taking it on. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt and Brandon from MIG/APG to give us a little presentation on everything.
Welcome, gentlemen.
All right, thank you. Are you hearing me through the mic? Yeah, generally? Okay, awesome. Just gonna scoot myself over a little bit here. So yeah, as Shane said, a lot or kind of most of what you see tonight should be familiar to you. We're just gonna give an overview of kind of everything we've gone through with you and what we're proposing in terms of the updates to the code to address the middle housing requirements. So apologies for the repeat, but for the public hearing, we wanted to make sure we gave a fairly thorough overview. So we'll walk through it and then happy to take any questions afterwards. Or I guess during a hearing, if you ask questions we're happy to answer questions whenever you want to ask them, I guess. So we'll talk about kind of where we are, just the overview of what we've been doing, and what House Bill 2001 and Senate Bill 458 require generally, or what the kind of intent of them was, walk through the code updates or recommended code amendments associated with each of those, and talk a little bit about affordable housing considerations and then next steps, and then not really, eventually we'll adjourn our presentation. So that's kind of where we're headed. I think we have about 21 slides maybe, so a little longer than our last couple, but not too bad. And I'll probably go through some of these fairly quickly, but if people have questions or I need to elaborate, just let me know. As Shane said, we're kind of coming to the close of the process here. We are at this public hearing with y'all, and then the hope, I guess, or expectation is that we'll be in front of council for their first meeting in May, on May 2nd, if you all choose to recommend moving forward with this. And we'll be kind of well out there ahead of the adoption deadline, which is June 30th. It also gives a little time, we've got a little cushion in here if there are more meetings needed. So I'll just kind of note that. But this just kind of reflects the process we've gone through up to this point, including the last several meetings we've had with you all. So just kind of quick background on House Bill 2001, adopted during the 2019 legislative session. The point of the legislation really was to expand options for different types of housing in cities throughout the state that are somewhere between 10,000 and above. 10,000 to 25,000 population cities are medium cities. They need to address requirements associated with duplexes. You all are in the large city category, so large cities and cities in the Portland metro area need to address an expanded set of guidelines around allowing for sort of a full range of middle housing types in areas where you allow single-family detached homes. We'll talk about those in a minute. And again, deadline, June 30th, 2022. So coming right up, but we're in pretty good shape at the moment, at least where we are. So, and as we've mentioned in previous meetings, the city of Keizer got a grant from the state to do this work. And the processes included kind of an initial review of the code audit, amendments to the code, and then we also provided some community outreach support as part of this. And the last couple we know, I have to repeat those. Just kind of a quick overview of what do we mean by middle housing, kind of mostly for audience members. So duplex, this middle housing includes these different types of things. A duplex, which is 2 units on a single lot or parcel. SB 458 sort of changes that equation a little bit in terms of where the individual units are, but as approved, 2 units on a single lot or parcel. Triplex, 3 units on a lot. Fourplex, 4. Cottage cluster refers to smaller detached dwellings that are oriented around a common courtyard or open space. And then townhomes are attached units, individual units, each on their own piece of property or their own lot. And again, we'll talk about how kind of Senate Bill 458 changes that a little bit. And so kind of next, I'll talk about the amendments first to the comprehensive plan and then to the development code. Pretty minor amendments, I would say, to your comprehensive plan. Just a few amendments to policies in the comprehensive plan to make sure that the policies in the comprehensive plan are consistent with what's being proposed for your development code and consistent with the House bill, the legislation, and the administrative rules that implement the legislation. So one, just to change to kind of clarify that middle housing is also allowed in single-family zones or areas. So that, and to one of your policies in your comp plan talks about a variety of housing, making sure that middle housing is included when we talk about what those example types of a variety of housing are. And then one of the state requirements is that for the most part, maximum densities don't apply to middle housing. They're really oriented or governed by lot sizes in most cases, with the exception of townhomes. So we'll talk about that when we go through. So again, pretty modest changes to the comp plan amendments, but that's part of what's being proposed for adoption. In terms of kind of your development code, first, just kind of a summary of the changes around permitted uses. These are all of the zones listed here where all the middle housing types I talked about a moment ago would be permitted uses because single-family detached homes are permitted uses in these zones. So the single-family zone, the limited density zone, the medium density zone, high density zone, mixed use zone, and the River Cherry Overlay District, you would allow middle housing in all these zones. Cottage cluster actually still in your code is referred to as a special permitted use. It would remain that way. It would be allowed outright, but it would need to meet specific code requirements consistent with what we're, again, proposing here. So some of the specific standards that will change, I'll summarize on this in the next slide or two. Duplexes would be the same minimum lot size, and this first set of bullets applies to every zone except the RH zone. So minimum lot size for duplexes would be 4,000 square feet, same thing as what you apply to single-family detached. 5,000 for triplexes, 7,000 for quadplexes and cottage clusters, 1,500 square feet for townhomes. Same thing in the RH, except that the minimum lot size would remain at 6,000 feet, except for townhomes and quadplexes and cottage clusters, which would be 7,000 square feet. And these are all generally consistent with the House Bill 2001 requirements. And then most of your standards around lot width and lot depth and setbacks, heights wouldn't really change. They're pretty much already mostly consistent with House Bill 2001 and the administrative rules. But a couple things to note, lot width would still be 40 feet and 50 feet in the RH zone, but 20 feet for townhomes, so that's different. Lot depth, 70 feet and 80 feet in the RH zone, that's different. And then setbacks, front setback of 10 feet, rear 14 or 20, and I think that partly reflects what Shane talked about a moment ago. So that change is related both to partly to House Bill 2001, but also just to the change in the way you address rear setbacks. Side setbacks of 5 feet. Height, generally the same, other than the comment that Shane made about multifamily, but also for cottage clusters, those would be limited to a height of 25 feet. And that's consistent with, again, House Bill 2001 and the administrative rules. And then again, I mentioned this earlier, but most middle housing types would be exempt from density maximums in each zone, except townhomes, or townhouses, which would, the maximum density consistent with the state rules would be 25 units per acre. it's in the state rules, 25 units per acre or 4 times the maximum density for other uses, and 25, whichever's less. 25's the lesser in this case. Dimensional standards, these are just graphics that illustrate the standards I just talked about. I'll note that we hadn't updated the 10-foot rear setback here. So, and this is not a graphic that's been embedded into your code. This is just for illustrative purposes, just to kind of show you what the setbacks would be based on the updates, again, with the exception of the rear setback, which would be 14 or 20. This is just kind of a summary of, for the River Cherry Overlay District, what those standards would be, and you see kind of new columns for triplexes and quadplexes and cottage cluster. And so that's a zone where you allow for smaller lots for different types of uses. So these do differ from what I showed you on the last slide. I will not kind of go into all of these lot size changes, but this does summarize what the lot sizes would be in the overlay district and within the base zones underneath the overlay district. So that's why it's a complicated table, because you've got all the zones that are within the overlay district and then what the different standards are. So it's a bunch of information in one table. So sorry about that. Minimum off-street parking standards, essentially for single-family detached homes. We're not proposing a change. It would remain 2 spaces per dwelling. For all of the middle housing types, consistent again with the state standards, it would be 1 space per dwelling unit. And we put together some illustrations just to kind of show you what that could look like. Again, these aren't proposed to be in your code, but they do give you a sense of, for these different middle housing types, different numbers of units, how parking could be oriented on a lot at that minimum of 1 space per unit standard. So just to give you a sense of that. And then we showed the kind of your minimum dimensional standards per space is kind of on the bottom left, and that is consistent with your code there. So design standards, so
One
you
second.
are, yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Person?
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, so on the parking, these are all, on your illustrations are all outside parking, so does a garage count as that 1 space?
Yes, well, no, thank you. That's something, yeah.
That's
we've
in
talked-
addition to, so what we're actually talking about is one outside space per unit, is that correct?
Basically, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yep. Yeah, so if somebody has a garage, you don't count that as a parking space, but they can park a car there, so, per the code. So you could end up with 2, basically. So we're not changing the definition in that regard in the code. Design standards, you already apply design standards to single-family development. The proposal here is essentially to apply those same design standards to middle housing as well. We did make a few recommended changes in the code to your design standards to make sure they're clear and objective. That's just an overall requirement for every community in Oregon, that all of your standards be clear and objective. And we did prepare a new graphic to illustrate these. So it kind of lists those standards, and the graphic illustrates, I think, all of them. Yeah, all of them. This is where Shane mentioned this is like the old version of the graphic that has some of those dimensions in red, which when we put it together, we thought, well, that'll be useful to like make it easier to see them. But we weren't sort of thinking about, but when you reproduce them, you're probably going to print them black and white. So those have been and will be updated to just grayscale. That's what's in the packet that you have in front of you. So that will be a change to this graphic, but no substantive changes, really just a change to the color used, so it's easier to make copies of things. So I won't go through those in detail. Again, this is pretty similar to what you have already. And for any new home, somebody wants to develop that, build that, they choose 5 of these things in developing the home. And I'll note really briefly that a question came up in another community about kind of, would these make sense with kind of something that's not more of a traditional single-family detached homes? And yeah, a lot of these could apply to sort of different styles of architecture, I will note, including those used often for plexes or townhomes. So, middle housing conversions, that's something that essentially needs to be allowed. And the converted housing type, assuming the converted housing type is allowed in the underlying zones, you need to allow those conversions. It can't create kind of non-conformance with your standards. Although conversions are exempt from additional design requirements and public improvements. But they're subject to development review, and these illustrations just kind of show you, okay, what might that mean in terms of a conversion? In terms of different ways you could take an existing house and convert a portion of the house or the dwelling to another unit, whether it's becomes a duplex or triplex or quadplex or whatever it might be. So some updates to your cottage cluster requirements. Again, you had cottage cluster requirements already in your code. A lot of communities didn't have that prior to adoption of House Bill 2001. You did. So rather than just and there are a number of those standards in what's called the Middle Housing Model Code, and in some communities, they're just kind of mostly adopting those model code standards. In your case, we took your standards and updated them, so we kind of kept a lot of what you had, but updated it to make sure that it was consistent or is consistent with what's in the House Bill and the administrative rules. So a number of updates just to make sure that they're consistent with the House Bill or what's in the model code, which has essentially kind of been vetted as consistent with the House Bill. So some of the changes that we made in addition, one, the cottage clusters are defined in the House Bill as having a minimum density of 4 units per acre. So that's, and potentially a maximum of 8 units per cluster. So that's something that was embedded in your code. Require 150 square feet of open space per unit for that common area, that common courtyard. Some of the standards we revised to defer to residential development design standards in other code sections because some of what you had in this section of your code wasn't going to be consistent with those. So we essentially made sure that they are. And then there were in your code some procedures related to approval of cottage clusters that are not what you apply to single family detached. You need to apply the same standards to this form of housing as you do to single family detached homes in large part. So we amended or are recommending amending several of those things, including some of the utility requirements to be consistent with, so that what you're applying to cottage cluster is consistent for the most part with what you apply to single family detached homes, except where the state says you can do different things, and you'll still do different things in those cases. So,
Shane?
I just wanted to add one thing for the cottage clusters, just so you kind of are aware. That section does have a lot of red in it. It's kind of all around, and there's a bunch of strikeouts. And the one thing I wanted to point out is that we've had cottage clusters on the books since, I believe, 2013-ish. But when we allowed them before, it was only allowed if you were doing a division of land. And so this House bill has changed what we can do and how you can build a cottage cluster. And so that really is part of the impetus for having to make a lot of the changes that we made, is that we're looking at cottage clusters as an outright allowed housing type on one single parcel and orienting multiple small structures. And so a lot of the requirements that we had in there and the process was really driven around the process of platting and getting essentially a subdivision approval, or it was a cottage cluster development approval. But so I just kind of wanted to clarify that for you all as you've looked through that. If you're like, well, why are we getting rid of all of these sections? Well, that's because those sections are applicable when you're creating new parcels, but they're really not applicable when you're just getting a building permit. So hopefully that adds a little bit of clarity for you.
thank you. No, that was good. Thank you. That's good clarification. So some changes also to the approval procedures and administration as it relates to middle housing. And so really, the approval procedures need to be, again, the same for these types of housing as they are for single-family detached homes. So you had a number of approval procedures that were previously applied to middle housing that now don't apply. So that's kind of what that first bullet is about. All middle housing types will be subject to development review. That's what single-family detached goes through. That's a type 1C procedure. Cottage cluster is currently the only type of middle housing that's not subject to the type 1C, so it will be subject to that. And then middle housing will be subject to the same public facility and improvement requirements that apply to single-family detached homes. There are some differences when we get to talking about middle housing land divisions, so we'll kind of clarify that stuff then. But in general, in terms of just approval of middle housing types, this is what would be applied. So now I will talk about Senate Bill 458. Again, just kind of start out with the background here. This was passed after House Bill 2001. It's kind of a companion bill to House Bill 2001, but it was adopted afterwards in the 2021 session. And I think I've noted this before, but because it was adopted so recently, there wasn't a set of like an administrative rulemaking procedure that the state went through to sort of define how to apply this legislation. That was done for House Bill 2001, but not for Senate Bill 458. So we and you and others have been kind of figuring this out just based on the Senate bill, not having some additional guidance from the state, except that they have provided guidance when asked for guidance. So the folks at the state have been pretty good about providing guidance for us. We and others have had a lot of questions as we've gone through this. So the sort of main gist of that Senate bill was to require cities that are also subject to House Bill 2001 to allow what are called expedited land divisions for middle housing. Cities already needed to allow expedited land divisions for in certain circumstances. This applies those same procedures to middle housing that is created essentially consistent with your code requirements associated with middle housing. And the intent really was to kind of expand home ownership options. Oftentimes middle housing, especially I would say plexes, duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, tend to be rental units. By allowing division of the property that those units are on into one lot per unit, it increases the opportunity for those to be home ownership or ownership housing as opposed to rental housing. So that was the main intent of Senate Bill 458. And so even though it was passed later, the deadline for compliance or consistency is the same as HB 2001. It's June 30th of this year, and so we've folded those amendments into this process as well. So kind of a few key elements within the proposed amendments. One, we've added some definitions for child lots and parent lots. The parent lot is what you start out with. The child lots are what you end up with after the middle housing land division. So that's just kind of a key thing. Those terms get used throughout the code amendments. And so middle housing, we've added specific procedural requirements into your code, or are recommending doing that, both for middle housing land divisions, but also for expedited land divisions. There's a separate section. All that stuff, or a lot of that, is in state statute now, but we're recommending including it in your code. So if somebody comes in the door, you have to refer them to the statute. For these types of procedures, final decision is by staff, final local decision. And then there can be appeal heard by a hearings officer. Any appeal of that goes straight to the Court of Appeals rather than the Land Use Board of Appeals. That's part of what makes it expedited by not going through that state Land Use Board of Appeals process. And then the other things that make it expedited are the timeframes, which I think I have a slide on next. So in terms of just some of the specific requirements for these land divisions, again, I mentioned we've got new chapters in your code for them. Most of these requirements, the substantive ones are basically from the statute, but we organize them to be consistent with the way your development code is organized, and to follow kind of a similar format to how you do partitions or how you regulate partitions within your code. the things that someone would have to submit along with an application for a middle housing land division, site plan, and a preliminary plat. They need to provide separate utility connections for each of the units that result from the land division. They also need to provide easements to allow for those utility connections, as well as things that are shared amongst the resulting parcels, so things like walkways and driveways and things like that. And the middle housing land divisions must ultimately be consistent with building code requirements, so they need to include copies of building permits and demonstrate compliance with that. So those are all the things that have to be submitted along with the application for a middle housing land division. In addition to that, ultimately, the preliminary plat, there are some things you can require and would require. So one, that once you go through this division, you don't get to, somebody doesn't get to go in and divide it again. It's not a like keep dividing these lots and adding more units. It's a one-time deal. Two, that for the purposes of applying your development code standards down the line, once it's been approved as a middle housing development, it's still a middle housing development. So you still got, it's a unit of a duplex. It's not now a single family detached home for, again, the purposes of applying your code standards. Three, accessory dwelling units are not allowed on that resulting, in addition to the individual unit of the middle housing, not allowed in addition to that on that resulting child lot. Finally, when the final plat's submitted, it needs to be consistent with the process for the filing of it's consistent with the process for filing partitions, and also improvements you can require that they be and would require they be either constructed or guaranteed through a performance bond. So make sure that any required improvements are going to happen. You know, they're guaranteed to happen because they're done, or they're guaranteed through a performance bond.
So point of clarification, Matt. So if a lot is large enough, let's say to accommodate 4 lots, but initially they come in for just a single lot division, it splits into 2. Is there wisdom at that point to let them know, hey, if you ever see this lot as being 4, you need to get it done now because this is your one-stop shop type opportunity? I mean, I guess that's something they could do when they talk with Shane and stuff, and Shane could advise them of what the rules are, but.
If they were coming in with a proposal for a middle housing land division, then I think, yeah, you'd want to let them know that. If it was and they'd come in with the middle housing land division, either at the same time they were coming in with the proposal for the development of the middle housing, so they'd be coming in and saying, okay, we want to develop a 4-plex here, and at the same time split that lot into 4 lots where you got a unit on each one. So that's where it's important, I guess, to let them know. It's not so much that.
I guess I'm thinking if somebody's going to phase a project, right? If their budget only allows them to do 2 units at a time, but their goal is to do 4, they can't meet all the requirements because they wouldn't have building permits and everything else for the additional 2 units in a phased project.
Yeah, again, and this only applies to middle housing land divisions.
That's right.
It doesn't apply to, somebody just comes in to split a lot in 2 and put they could split a lot in 2, and if each of those resulting lots met the lot and dimensional requirements for a duplex, they could build the duplex. That's not a middle housing land division. I mean, the middle housing land division is splitting the lot that's got the duplex on it into 2 separate lots.
Got it, okay.
I don't know if I'm totally understanding.
No, I think that clarifies.
Does that
And
make sense?
I think what I would just add that I think that realistically, in a situation where you have a large enough parcel, a property owner or developer is going to want to look at, does it make more sense to do a subdivision, a partitioning, or a middle housing land division? And I can tell you that from Senate Bill 458's perspective, the intent with that, I mean, frankly, we got the guidance that we have to allow it concurrently with the project, or kind of at the front end, we have to allow the division. But I can tell you that in reading the bill and looking at what was discussed, is the concept was more, okay, I've built a middle housing land, or not a division, I've built a middle housing project, and now I want to come back and I want to split that into separate ownership parcels, almost more like a condominium kind of scenario in my simplistic point of view. So I do think your point is very well taken, and that is something that myself and Dina have talked about, and we've actually already had folks that have been kind of tracking this, which have asked questions, when can we do this? When can we do this? And I think a key element here is to know that this is intended to provide some choice, but it doesn't provide folks to be able to just do whatever they want either. So, I mean, there will have to be some decisions made by those property owners or developers to say, well, do I want to go this route or do I want to go this route? Because I think you're absolutely right. Once you designate that parent and child lot, there's a notation on the plat that says no further divisions. So we will definitely be making people aware of that, but it may result in, if there's a big enough lot, they'll go with a standard partition and then come back and build a duplex here and a duplex there later on.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
All right. Let's see. I'm just going to skip ahead one. Okay, I'm going back. Sorry. So just some things, so another thing that's embedded in the administrative rules associated with House Bill 2001 is that at the time of adoption of the code amendments to comply with or be consistent with House Bill 2001, the state requires cities to consider adopting methods to increase affordability of middle housing, and they list some specific things in the administrative rules. So these are the things: systems development charge waivers or deferrals, criteria for property tax exemptions, construction excise tax. You've looked at some of these things in the past as part of your recent housing needs analysis updates and or other discussions at the council level. And we need to, there will be findings as this goes to council about what you've done to look at these things. So this is just a note that this is something that the state requires. It doesn't preclude you from kind of re-examining or re-looking at or doing some of these things later. One of the state requirements associated with, it's actually House Bill 2003, is that cities will need to update their housing needs analyses every 6 to 8 years, depending on the size of the city. And then within a year after updating your next update of your housing needs analysis, you'll need to prepare something called a housing production strategy. That's a time when most cities are going to look at some of these things again. So we didn't go through a sort of an extensive process as part of this code update process to look at these things, but we will note in the findings that these are things you've looked at in the past and will look at in the future at a minimum as part of the housing production strategy. But there's other opportunities, and I believe you're looking at some council discussion around different housing strategies in the next, I think, year or so. Is that correct? Make sure I get this right.
Yeah, I think, and the council goals, and actually, City Councilor Duran might want to speak to that a little bit. That is one of the identified things in the work plan for council to look at some housing affordability issues. So I know they kind of have a committee that they're starting, or a work group. Is that what it's called, a work group? Sorry, there's a lot of terms.
So that's just another opportunity to look at these things. So we bring this up just to note it's one of the requirements of House Bill 2001. You'll ultimately see some findings in the package that goes to council about this. And it'll talk about what the city's previously done and what the city is expecting to do in the future around these different housing affordability methods. And again, the House bill and the administrative rules kind of list these specific things. So we listed them up here. So I think that is pretty much the end of the overview presentation. So city staff is recommending that y'all move this forward, approve, or recommend approval to council of the code amendments, but we're here to, hear what you have to say about that, take any questions you might have, and any suggestions for any, changes or revisions to the amendments. So I'll stop. If you have any more questions.
Commissioners, any questions for Brandon or Matt or Shane or City Attorney Johnson before we move on to public testimony? No? Okay, well, thank you. I'm sure there might be something that comes up, so just keep your ears peeled, and if we have to phone a friend, we'll phone a friend.
We'll be right here, so yes. Thank you.
All right, so I've got Rhonda Rich signed up. Welcome, Rhonda. It's great to see people in the audience. Thank you for spending some time and coming down and hearing about this evening. I've only got one person signed up, so if you've change your mind and feel compelled to talk to us, let us know. Rhonda, thank you for being here. If you would, please state your name and city of residence for the record, and we are here to listen.
Okay, I'm Rhonda Rich. I live in West Keizer. I'm president of the West Keizer Neighborhood Association, and I'm sorry we're a little behind on coming before you and speaking with you. I know this has been going on since October, but we've had a change in board, and I just became president last Thursday, and we have a president who had to resign. So Shane is coming tomorrow night to our West Keizer Neighborhood Association meeting, and he's going to share what you decide tonight. And we know this is kind of after the fact, but we have let our residents know, our members know through email that this has been coming up, and I think it's been well publicized in the Keizer Times and on the city website. So I know Shane's coming tomorrow night, but I thought I should come and ask a few questions, and you probably don't get a lot of people come because I hope I don't ask stupid questions. Because this is, you guys are all real knowledgeable on this, and code development is not my strength. But I did move into West Keizer in 1976, kind of dates me, but we were looking for a house that had a large lot to have a garden and a big place for the kids to play. And so this is, I have to say, kind of painful. I mean, this has been happening. I know the infill for since at least 2015. That was the last time we were involved with the development department when Nate Brown was community development director. And he had approached us and talking about, there was a house on subdivided on Sunset Avenue where there was a house in the front, and then there was a manufactured home, and then a two-story house built behind that, and there was created a lot of issues with the neighbors. So he asked us to come together as a board and kind of talk about a few issues that he was asking about, like building materials on the front of the homes. And so this was all like getting into the nitty-gritty of building. And so so it's been a while since we've been been involved with the planning commission. I appreciate the work that you guys do, because this is 175 pages or so. I didn't go through it all, I'm sorry. I watched your March meeting and read the paper. And so so some of the, just to state West Keizer, I think many of you know, we border the River Road, the southern limits of up to city of Salem and Chemawa. So we have mostly single-family homes in our neighborhood, although that has been changing because of the large lots, and we're getting more infill because of a lot of deep lots. So my question is, not totally understanding what this middle housing is. I think Shane would probably be able to address this. I don't know what the average large lot size is in West Keizer, to where you're talking about the different types of housing, duplex, triplex, quadplex, cottage cluster. I was wondering, is townhouse a possibility in our neighborhood? And are we zoned? Is there zoning for single family? I mean, maybe that's a thing of the past, but.
Sure, yeah, I'll take a crack at trying to answer it, Rhonda. I mean, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, yes, residential single-family zoning is kind of a thing of the past with the implementation of House Bill 2001. There was a lot of articles when this went through the process that would say like the death of single-family zoning and things like that. But the zoning in West Keizer is primarily single-family. Frankly, the zoning in Keizer is primarily single-family. That's just what our zoning is. Over 70% of our land is zoned for single-family development, because that's what we were when we became a city in the 80s. I don't know off the top of my head really average lot size in Keizer, because it really does vary. I mean, you've got like Sunset, and you've got Cummings, and you've got Dearborn, and you've got, a few streets that you have pretty big lots. A lot of them are in the quarter acre or even up to half acre range. But in the more, what I would call denser neighborhoods, the more established, like the Palmacia neighborhood, your neighborhood, those lots were developed at a time where I would still guess the vast majority of lots are going to be in excess of 7,000 square feet. The home I own is in North Keizer, and my subdivision was done in 97, I want to say. My lot's 7,200 square feet. And when I drive in my neighborhood compared to driving in your neighborhood, our lots are much smaller. You know, so I mean, I'd have to do some analysis and look at a map, but I mean, essentially, yes, townhouses are allowed wherever single-family homes are allowed now. That's something that is just part of the House bill. And ultimately, what the House bill does from kind of it's a little bit of an overly simplistic viewpoint, but a simple way that I've kind of explained it to folks that help, frankly, it's the way I choose to understand it, is essentially we're kind of redefining what a single-family home is. So up to a fourplex, we treat it the same as a single-family home, essentially, with the caveat that the sideboards of lot sizes, based on the charts that Matt went through, the lot sizes are varied. For example, in Keizer, our minimum lot size is 4,000 square feet. It's been that for a long, long time. We used to limit anything under 5,000 to a zero lot line dwelling, which we quit doing, I think, a year or so ago. Frankly, the difference between a 5,000 square foot lot subdivision and a 4,000 square foot lot subdivision, I mean, maybe Dave, because he was a surveyor forever, but most of us would drive that and not be able to tell the difference, because really it's a function of the house massing and the setbacks, and none of those things are any different. But when we go into the older, more established neighborhoods that were built in the 60s and the 70s and even the early 80s, the expectation of the marketplace was larger lots, larger yards. And pretty much everything we've seen built here and in Salem and really around the state of Oregon and a lot of communities that are more metropolitan areas, we've seen developers come in and property owners come in and they want to maximize their return on investment, spread out the assessments of having to build streets and water lines and sewer lines. So they create, for the most part, as many lots as they can design to fit in there. So it is hard because in some ways, yes, single family zoning is gone away, and that now where we allow a house, we allow a duplex. And on most lots in Keizer, where we allow a house, we probably allow a triplex and maybe even a fourplex, but they still have to be able to fit. They still have to meet setbacks. They still have to meet lot coverage standards. There still are the same height restrictions. And so I think it's a nuance that I will be interested to see how much of a felt impact we have in a lot of our established neighborhoods, because of where our property values sit and how the development pattern is already established. But it clearly does give property owners in those areas options that they haven't previously had. Does that kind of answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So potentially we could have cottage clusters too, housing, because 7,000 square foot.
Yes,
lots.
and I think that, one of the things we've seen, and again, in Keizer, we've been doing infill development for the last really 20 plus years. Our first infill section of code we adopted, I want to say it was in 2001, and we did a big project, and it was called Infill Development Standards. And over the years, that has actually just been now integrated into our development code. There's no special section anymore. It's just pretty much everything we do is infill development. And so I've been here for the whole 20 years of the implementation of that. And, I think realistically, one of the pieces that I do see that could possibly happen in a place like West Keizer or, some of the areas that have those large, deep lots that maybe are too narrow to fit legal means of access for fire trucks and things back to, those may be properties that folks are interested to go, well, I can't really divide my property. It doesn't make sense. It's too expensive, but I could build 3 little cottages back here and have rentals, or do a middle housing land division and end up doing, property ownership and have shared parking out front. So that is something that, theoretically is able to happen now that in the past, the only way you could do that was if you were dividing the land and providing certain access requirements and utility provisions that were more akin to a standardized subdivision. And so I think in all the years we've had cottage clusters, I've had 3 developers, 2 that were very serious. They drew up plans and everything, but when they ended up doing the math, I said, boy, it doesn't make any sense to do a cottage cluster. I'm better off to do a normal subdivision. And so they both ended up going with a normal subdivision. I have 2 property owners in Keizer right now. Neither's in your neighborhood, but I'd have 2 property owners in Keizer who've been talking to me a lot. And one is very interested in the cottage cluster development because they have their nice house that they like and they have big mature trees in their backyard. And they don't want to carve it up and have to deal with all of that, but they're very interested in building a couple cottages, one for a mother-in-law, one for a kid. And so, you know, they kind of have a certain desire to provide a certain type of housing. So yeah, on those, I mean, I'm not a designer, but I did some, because I have a house with a 7,200 square foot lot. My house is a 1,500 square foot house, or a little bit bigger than that. But, you know, just standard 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch house built in the late 90s. And looking at my lot, which is a big enough lot theoretically for these types of housing, I don't know how I would fit a cottage cluster on my yard without tearing down the house completely and starting over. I mean, so it's kind of one of those where I think ultimately the built environment will drive a lot of what we see development potential. And so that's where, you know, my opinion, and it's only an opinion, my opinion is where we'll see this implemented is in those areas where you may have an extra deep lot or an extra wide lot that somebody wants to convert to a duplex because they can't meet an access requirement to do a standard partition. Or they really like the idea of cottage housing and they're looking at a certain market that they said, hey, this is who I can market these units to. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and so the notification to the neighbors, how many feet is it that you, if an area is being developed into cottage clusters or a duplex, is there a notification to the neighbors?
No, the only time there would be a notification is if we're doing a standard partition or the middle housing land division section, which Matt had talked about. In the middle housing land division section, there are specific standard, help me, what the notice area? 100 feet, okay. So the state statute says, hey, with a middle housing land division, there would be notice sent out to property owners within 100 feet. With a standard partitioning or subdivision, that boundary is a 250-foot radius from the existing property. But if somebody's taken and they have a single family home in the neighborhood and they're gonna convert it to a duplex or a triplex, that's just getting a building permit, which would be no different than a neighbor. I mean, now with these rules, it's no different than a neighbor who's choosing to add on to their house and they want to add a master bedroom or they want to add a second story. It's an expected right of property ownership that says, hey, this property allows for this, so I can do it. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks for the clarification.
Sure.
Okay, so height and setbacks are important, parking was important to the neighborhood. And I think that a lot of that remains the same in the code for,
As much as we
Yeah.
could, yes. The height and setbacks does remain the same with the very narrow exception for medium density multifamily, which isn't generally right in the single family neighborhoods. And setbacks are the same. We didn't change those for single family homes, with the exception that cottage clusters, the state mandated that you can't have more than a 10-foot setback. So whereas a duplex or a triplex built on a single lot, you're gonna have a 14 or a 20-foot rear yard setback based on whether or not it's a 1 or a 2-story structure. A cottage cluster will be allowed to be within 10 feet of that boundary because we have to allow that, so.
okay, and you said the height requirement has increased from 35 to 45?
That's only for multifamily development, so
okay.
that's for apartments.
Oh, okay.
Specifically for
Okay,
apartments.
good.
So all of these buildings are held to the same standard as
Okay.
the existing standard for single-family homes, which is 35 feet. That's what we've allowed as long as I've worked here.
Okay,
Yeah, right, and cottage clusters are lower.
Okay.
We only have to allow them to be 25 feet, so
Okay.
that's what we're proposing. And thank you, Councilor Johnson. Parking is a little bit different. We're not changing it for single family because we don't have to. But for these middle housing land types, the parking is mandated that we can't allow more than one space per unit.
Can't require.
Or we can't require more than one space per unit. So that's our new minimum requirement, is one space per unit. So if a developer chooses to provide more spaces because people want parking and the market calls for it, they can provide it, absolutely. But we can't require more. So previously, it kind of gets in the weeds. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to belabor this. But we've always allowed duplexes in Keizer on corner lots of 7,000 square feet or more since 1998. That's always been allowed. In some neighborhoods, developers come in and they plan for that. When we allow those, though, historically, we've required 2 spaces per unit, just like a single family home. So a duplex historically would have required 4 parking spaces. Now it will only require 2 because that's the maximum we can require as a minimum. That's
The on-street parking too, the garage doesn't count.
correct. We don't.
Yeah.
We choose not to count on garage parking. The state encourages that we consider that. We had some discussions about that, and it was pretty clear that the direction was we kind of want to protect. We've heard a lot of concerns on parking. So
Yeah, because we have some streets, well, many streets that don't have sidewalks, and Sunset Avenue and
Absolutely.
Dearborn are difficult areas. Okay, well, I just had a few kind of points that I wanted to ask. Certificate of occupancy, what does that mean?
Sure.
Is there a short version?
Yes, I'll keep it really short. That's basically when you complete a building project, you complete a house, it's the final approval by the building official that says you can now move in and live there.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I know you had some discussion whether it was parent-child. I thought, well, gee, child is kind of indicates it's a smaller development. And with some of these, I don't feel that's really portrays what we're doing here. So I would, I'm not totally against it, but I was thinking principal and secondary. So just throwing out some suggestions. And then stormwater drainage, we have stormwater drainage on, I think, the streets that kind of parallel the river, but up like Dearborn, Sunset, there is not storm drains. So we're building more, there's no consideration. Does all the stormwater have to drain onto the property? So these places, well, like say cottage clusters, they would have to provide kind of a rain garden or something for drainage from there?
Yeah, I mean, yes, most likely. The Oregon drainage law doesn't allow you to put your water on other people's property. Generally, grading and drainage plans are looked at with land divisions, not just with building permits. However, they do have to take into account, well, where does the water from the roof go? So normally those are going to be private systems. And actually, Commissioner Grenz could speak to this a little bit better. Generally in Keizer, most drainage that's created with development, we require people to keep that on site regardless. So yeah, so roof drains will go down into the ground that the property is on. And so, yeah.
Okay, because we have flooding like issues on Sunset and many of these streets that don't have sidewalks, so. Okay, that's all I have, and I appreciate you going through this because I understand the model for the state is a little more restrictive, so it's good that Keizer's on top of this. And I appreciate what you do, Shane, so, and all of you.
Well, thanks for coming down, Rhonda. It's always a pleasure to see you, and nice to have you still active with West Keizer Neighborhood Association.
Thank you.
All right, that's all I have for folks signed up on this sheet, but I had Carolyn Horman, David Loudon, and Jeffrey Kelder. Did any of you want to speak this evening? No? Okay. You sure? All right, commissioners, anything to add? City Attorney Johnson.
You want to double check that there's nobody else that hasn't signed up that would want to?
Yeah, Debbie, do we have anybody else in the back signed up?
No, I meant if they haven't signed up even.
Yeah,
okay.
if there's anybody that wants to come up and you haven't signed up, please feel free to come on up. I will note, I know Shane did it earlier, but I'll note for the record, we did get one email communication from Mr. DeBlasi, and that's in the packet on the back of your agenda. And that's the only written communication we got, correct? Okay. So any, going once, going twice? All right, Shane, should we close the public hearing then? All right, well, I will close the public hearing at 7:05. Okay, so we've got staff's recommendation in front of us. I'll point out that if there's going to be a motion on the table, we need to identify this document here, which is the grayscale version of the descriptions, or the design features. And then on the 3.115, we'll reference this document. This has the changes that were noted by Commissioner Granson, brought forth by Shane and staff this evening. There's a couple other minor sort of order of definitions thing that I identified with Shane, but I'll just point out for the sake of the commissioners, it's really just the order and the definitions of the plexes. So it says single family first, then triplexes, and then duplexes. And so we're just gonna, make them make sense in order. And I think that was it as far as anything that was identified. Is there any other things that we need to discuss before we consider a motion? Commissioner Burson.
So, Shane, when you were talking about cottage clusters with Rhonda there, I'm sorry, I do have my list. There we go. So anyway, when you were talking with her about cottage clusters, you talked about putting a couple in there, but in the presentation, we talked about a minimum density of 4 units per acre. So do you actually take into account if a lot's 0.5 acres, you could have 2? Is that what it comes down to?
Well, it gets a little bit more convoluted than that, because I think, Matt or Brandon, help me, but I believe a cottage has to be at least 3 total. That's what makes it a cottage.
So when you gave the example of 2, it really has to be like 3.
And I said a couple, but that's a bad choice of words on my part.
Okay.
So yeah, to do a cottage cluster, you would need at least 3 units, because that's what the code says. And the density piece, it's that minimum of 4 units per acre. So it's essentially, it becomes a math equation. So depending on how large that property is, we'd have to kind of dole it down.
So do we know the size of the lot to be able to reach that?
Yeah.
3 minimum?
Oh.
I was told there'd be no math tonight.
I know. I'm a planner. I'm not an engineer.
30,000 square feet.
30,000 square feet?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
That's 4 units per acre approximately.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you.
Math in public, I love it. All right, Commissioner Rents.
I'm going to stick with the cottage cluster section. The parking and garage section, that's in page 149, as numbered in the packet. Basically, we're restricting parking or garages from being within 20 foot of a street. And it cannot be between the street and a cottage. Is there a reason that we wouldn't allow, say, a driveway and parking in that front setback?
Shane, before you answer that, City Attorney Johnson, I just have a point of clarification. I've closed the public hearing. Is this the right time to ask those kind of questions if we're going to make any? Okay. I just want to make sure in case there's any changes. So thank you for allowing me to clarify.
Sorry, I was getting to the section. Okay, so you were talking about it's like number 4?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, what's your question on it again? My bad.
Well, this seems to not allow for direct driveway access and parking in between the street and a cottage, when it seems like you could just build a driveway and have a lot of your parking, 2, 3, 4 spots there.
Right, so
And I know I'm blindsiding you here.
no, it's fine. So in my mind, you absolutely could have parking directly off the street. I'm just trying to, in my brain, I'm trying to think how, because, we're talking about a garage structure or a parking structure. If there was a shared parking structure, that it'd have to be set back 20 feet. So,
But it says parking, just even a parking space.
The driveway.
what?
Well, it says parking and/or garage structures shall not be located. So I take that to mean a parking space.
I see.
And so I'm having.
No, I see what you're saying, and I read that to be a parking structure or a garage structure.
Oh, a parking structure,
Oh, parking and/or garage structures.
Yeah.
That's, yeah,
I'm reading it the same way you were.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I understand what you're saying, and I did not read it that way, or I did not intend it that way, because in my mind, yes, you have a street, you have we'll just call it a driveway. That's where you park. We can, well, I don't know what the appropriate thing to do is, but we can fix that language if make sure that we're clear that that's
Is that
what's
what the
intended to be
intent
allowed.
is?
That's my intent, yeah. It was not my intent to say you can't park in a driveway.
Yeah, did you guys find the section? It's 2.
Yeah, we found the section in the code amendments. What we're looking for is the section in the
The OAR.
OAR
Yeah.
and the model code
Yeah.
to see if that's straight from the OAR and model code or if it's some slight variation on it. So that's what we're trying to look
Big
at.
picture, as the planning director, you have the authority of the pen stroke, so what you intended here is just what you need to implement. But you're pretty young, I don't think you'll be here forever.
Well, not if I implement stuff crazy, that's for sure.
Well, and
Parking
if,
structure or garage.
Or garage structure,
It's not
yeah.
a garage structure, it's just a garage.
Right.
Yeah, that's the problem with writing DC. They teach us it's okay to be repetitive. I mean, most people are taught when you write, you don't want to be repetitive. If the meaning was both, it should have said parking structures and/or garage structures, if that's what the meaning is. So I think Matt and Brandon will figure out if that's required or not, or if that was the actual intent. Because I would agree with Commissioner Grenz, if I understand your point. It seems kind of goofy that you can't have a parking space in that area.
And that is essentially language from the Middle Housing Model Code. You're not required to implement every subject section of the Middle Housing Model Code, but where we did identify, kind of early in the process, we said, here's a bunch of standards that you could apply to cottage clusters because they're in the Middle Housing Model Code. Do we want to apply these or not? I think that was one of the ones we identified. So in the administrative rules, there's not that requirement. So you don't have to apply that. You can apply it, but you don't have to.
Thank you.
That's my interpretation.
So my thought would be to add the word structures after parking.
okay. Commissioner Burson, did you have a question or comment?
No, I was just nodding my head.
Oh, okay. No, I thought I saw your hand up earlier. Commissioner Herb.
Thank you, Chair Lawyer. I just had one correction on page 152. Strike the number 2 under A, and then the next one would be a 2, and then the next one would be a 3. There was a tiny little other one.
Thank you.
Yeah, tiny little other one on page 21 where there should be a comma between eating and cooking.
Nice work catching those.
Page 21?
Yeah. In the third sentence, third line down. That's it for me, thank you.
All right. Commissioner Saldivar, you've been uncharacteristically quiet this evening.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Processing.
Not base housing.
Right.
The comma that you said, Jane, is on one.
Page 21.
And
It's under
Eating and
dwelling
cooking.
unit, under the definition of dwelling unit. The line, the last line, between eating and cooking.
The Oxford comma.
No.
I'm just being funny.
That's not the Oxford comma.
Okay, sorry.
Straight up comma.
I'm a big fan
Just a
of
straight
the
up
Oxford
comma.
comma. And that would be after cooking,
Okay,
so I appreciate it.
I digress. Anything else? I will state, this has been a really long process and we've had a lot of meetings on it. And I think that the work that has been done by MIG/APG and Shane and Shannon and Dina, I mean, it's been exemplary and we've had a lot of discussion and we've had some disagreements, but I think what we have, is making the best out of a situation that we really have no control on. And, when I hear things from, Rhonda asking questions about if and when neighbors are going to be able to participate in this, and I think that unfortunately this doesn't allow that. This is a big ask of a city that's already constrained, and I think that the things that have been put in here, frankly, will open up some opportunity, and hopefully so, and maybe through some work through the SEC process and other things like that, we might be able to accomplish the intended goal here, which is some affordable housing opportunities. So I just wanted to say thank you guys really for all the efforts and your patience, and as well as the commissioners. It's been a lot of work, and so thank you very much. Yep, Commissioner Rentz.
Before we perhaps jump into a motion, does anybody on the commission want to discuss the height restriction increase in the RM zone for multifamily, or is everybody pretty much in agreement on that?
Does that add, it basically just adds a story, right?
No, it takes the maximum height from 35 feet to 45 feet. That's measured to the peak.
Which, okay, right.
Is that a requirement in the state?
No, that's something you guys
That was
are
brought up.
proposing.
That might have been
Yeah.
brought up at planning
Might have been
commission.
one of those
You
I
weren't here.
He likes to kid me about them.
I'm thrilled by it, by the way.
Well, I think it was your request, wasn't it?
It was, and I thank Ms. Planning Director.
And to be fair, we've dealt with a number of developments, especially in medium-density zones where lots are already smaller. And so it becomes a challenge when we have density provisions that we want to target and meet to provide denser housing with modern construction practices, and people are no longer really building 312 pitched roofs. They tend to want a steeper pitched roof, which kind of gives a better aesthetic in a lot of ways. I've had multiple projects that have had to come in and modify designs to shrink down heights and make interior walls shorter, things like that. So, I mean, when Commissioner Granz brought it up, I will just say he's not the first person that's brought that up with our department as we've been working through an actual development proposal. So I see it as appropriate in the current marketplace and what we're seeing with multifamily development, so.
I'm good with it.
I feel like we should make an issue of it.
Well, really, as I think about it, 45 feet seems a little excessive.
I think 44 and a half feet.
Yeah, right, let's do
Yeah.
44 and a half. Let's go too crazy.
We'll just scoot over here a little bit. All right. You have your answer.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think we're at a point. Keep in mind, if we're going to put a motion on the table, we reference the, make a recommendation for the, what is the language I'm looking for? The changes to, and do we want to cite all the changes to the development code, or just
As amended.
as amended? So we don't need to read each section?
No, the ones you just referenced, just those three technical changes don't have to be referenced. I would reference, like you said, Chair Lawyer, those couple of items.
Right.
That we are looking at adopting the added, handed out version of 3.115, and then the graphics. Was that it? Was that?
Correct.
Well, and the the parking structures within.
And that,
Yeah.
yeah, that's as amended. I mean, there was no objection, as I understand, to those minor tweaks? Okay.
So you don't need every section read?
No. It's the
feel
staff
like-
recommendation with those changes.
Okay.
And as amended at the meeting.
And then citing those couple documents.
Mhm.
Commissioner Grants?
Are we ready for a motion? I move that we recommend approval of the planning packet submitted this evening with the exception of the updated versions of Code Section 3.115 that was handed out this evening and the
Design features
the
menu.
design features, the illustrations that were handed out in it tonight as well. And the,
And the amendments mentioned.
As amended.
as amended, yeah.
Second.
Okay. Yes.
You mean addition, right? Not exception?
Yes.
Okay. 'Cause you said in
No.
exception to,
The substitution of 3.115.
okay.
Substitution.
Yeah.
Substitution. Great. Okay, so we have a motion to approve the development code sections with the substitution of the 3.115 that was provided tonight, as well as the design features menu as amended by Commissioner Grants and seconded by Commissioner Herb.
Including the comprehensive plan amendment. You said development code, I think. So there is a Keizer
Right.
comprehensive plan
Correct.
provision too.
Correct. Comprehensive plan section, residential development goals, objectives and policies. Clear as mud?
Good.
Good. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right, motion passes unanimously with recommendation to council.
Yes.
Congratulations, guys. Great work, and thank you so much for all your efforts.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. I think Shane wants to take my off. All right.
Wait, I want to what?
Do we have any additional new or old staff business? If you
No, I
say
do not.
yet, okay, thank you. Seeing some signs out there for some development up on Verda.
Yeah,
Looks like there's a new chicken facility being built out off of Keizer Station. That's pretty cool.
yes.
And I will clarify by chicken facility, we're not doing a mass ag facility, it's a restaurant. Nothing. Council liaison. Councilor Duran, anything for us this evening?
I don't have much, but we're working on they're setting up a library or a work group for a new library. That's just something that'll be started here in the near future. You'll probably see quite a bit of information on that. Also, we're working on some multi-use sports fields at Keizer Rapids Park. And that's also going to a work group to go over and see how we can make those things happen. Other than that, we're just trying to play catch up on some regular business that we hadn't been able to get to. So that's it.
I'll take Chair's prerogative here and just throw another in there. On April 23rd, the Clagger Creek Watershed Council will be hosting Soggy Day in the Park. It's a great event. It's free for the entire family. It's a multi-party day in the morning. The Willamette River Keepers and the Keizer Environmental Group will be doing a cleanup project, which is going to be great. That's going to be about 9 to noon. And then the Soggy Day will actually start at noon to 3. And this year it's brought to us by Remodeling by Classic Homes and Northwest Dental Arts, Sancho's Tacos, and A to Z Rentals. So we're really excited about that. It's a free event. We'll have bounce houses, backhoe operation, jet boat rides on the river, and really good opportunity to just bring the family out and have a fun day. It's just Clagger Creek Watersheds Council's way of saying thank you for all the work we do. Most of our work is suck work, so we like to do stuff and say thanks for all the hard work. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to, sorry. Just wanted to let you know that the morning event that day is postponed till 10, from 10
Okay.
till noon.
That's right, because they only have the one event, not two. That's right, thank you. So come check it out. Free tacos, free bounce house, backhoe operations. It'll be a lot of fun. So down at Keizer Rapids Park on April 23rd. We got Commissioner Hutchins going on April 18th to the council, and you'll just let the council know what we got going on here tonight. And Shane, we had a conversation about May 11th. What are we thinking there?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's absolutely up to you all. We do not have a public hearing scheduled for the May meeting. You know, this was always our target to get here by this time, but we were uncertain as to whether or not we would be able to hit it and if we would have to carry forward meetings. So, I mean, in my opinion, and I know you guys thanked the consultant and our staff for all the hard work we've done, but just as a staff person here who actually get paid to do this job, you guys don't, or you all don't, and this has been a huge amount of work and a huge amount of review, and I've appreciated all your help. So, I mean, it's my vote that we take May off. Plus, I might have a few budget meetings and a bunch of other night meetings all in there too. So I'm fine with us not having a meeting. I don't have a public hearing for you to consider. I mean, we can come and talk, but I would be fully supportive if the Planning Commission were to say, you know, let's take May off. So, but it's completely up to you.
I felt kind of like a backhanded compliment.
No, what? No, I'm dead serious. You guys have done an amazing job, and I've appreciated the input I've gotten throughout this process. Really, this is a big project.
Well, you know, I wasn't going to say that, but yeah. No.
That would maybe be more accurate.
You guys are great. Also, I really don't want to do this in May, so I'm teasing. No, I think it'd be appropriate. We want a motion to cancel though for May, correct? Any really hard feelings on not having a meeting in May? No? All right, so let's get a motion on the table to cancel the May meeting, please, if that's what we want to do.
I move to cancel the May meeting as celebration for all the hard work we have done.
Okay.
I'll second.
Any discussion? I think Shane also deserves it, and so does City Attorney Johnson. It's been a lot of work. And Commissioners, again, I just want to reiterate, thank you so much. And to MIG, APG, thank you so much for this. You're not done with us. You still got to go talk to the City Council, but it's been a tremendous amount of work. And I think the last thing I'll say is, again, thank you very much to the public for coming tonight and providing some testimony and just listening. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Nay. I'm kidding. Aye. All right, motion passes. We're canceled for May. Any last minute, by the ways? All right, we will stand adjourned at 7:27. Thank you all again.